Imagine being told that your punishment will not be the merciful release of death, but something far worse, a fate so horrific that you will spend your remaining days begging for the execution that will never come, praying for an end to suffering that has been specifically designed to continue indefinitely while keeping you alive, to experience every moment of your systematic destruction. What you're about to learn about aren't just torture devices, but sophisticated machines of prolonged agony that represent humanity's most creative applications of engineering, medicine, and psychology to the problem of causing maximum human suffering while preventing the escape that death might provide. These 5 devices were considered so terrifying that medieval criminals would confess to any crime, accept any punishment, or betray any ally rather than face the possibility of being subjected to torments that made death seem like a blessed relief. The first device that medieval victims feared more than death itself was the strappado, also known as the Queen of Tortures, which had been engineered to destroy the human body so gradually and completely that death would only come after weeks or months of unimaginable agony. The victims' hands were tied behind their back and attached to a rope that passed through a pulley system mounted high above, allowing them to be lifted off the ground by their arms, while weights were attached to their feet to increase the stress on their shoulder joints. The genius of the strappado lay in its ability to cause systematic damage to every major joint in the victim's body, while keeping them conscious and aware throughout the entire process. The shoulder joints would be the first to dislocate, creating explosive pain that would radiate throughout the victim's body as ligaments tore and bones separated. But this was only the beginning of their ordeal, as the continued suspension would gradually stretch every muscle, tendon, and ligament in their body, while the added weights would ensure that the damage was permanent and progressive. The second device that inspired more terror than death was the Judas cradle, a pyramid-shaped torture seat that represented medieval engineering's most sophisticated approach to the problem of causing prolonged internal damage while maintaining the victim's consciousness and awareness. The victim would be slowly lowered onto the pointed apex of the pyramid, which would gradually penetrate their body through the anus, vagina, or other openings, while their own body weight provided the force necessary for the slow impalement. The device was adjustable in every conceivable way, allowing torturers to control the angle of penetration, the speed of descent, and the amount of additional weight that could be applied to accelerate or slow the process. What made the Judas cradle particularly terrifying was its psychological component. Victims were forced to choose between allowing their body weight to drive them deeper onto the spike or exhausting themselves trying to support their weight with their leg muscles, knowing that eventual fatigue would force them to sink deeper regardless of their efforts. The third device that victims feared more than execution was the Scavenger's Daughter, a compression torture device that had been specifically designed to fold the human body into impossible positions while systematically crushing bones, organs, and joints in a predetermined sequence that maximized suffering while preventing quick death. The victim would be forced into a crouched position with their knees against their chest and their arms wrapped around their legs, then secured in a series of iron hoops that could be gradually tightened using screw mechanisms. The compression would begin slowly, creating intense pressure on the spine and rib cage, while forcing internal organs to shift and compress in ways that caused excruciating pain without immediate fatal damage. As the compression continued, ribs would begin to crack one by one, creating sharp internal injuries that would puncture organs while the victim remained conscious. The final stages of compression would involve the complete collapse of the chest cavity and the crushing of major organs. But this process could take days or weeks to complete, while the victim experienced every moment of their gradual destruction. The fourth device that inspired more dread than death itself was the breaking wheel, which had been engineered to systematically destroy every major bone in the victim's body while keeping them alive and conscious throughout the entire process of their skeletal dismantlement. The victim would be tied to a large wooden wheel with their limbs extended beyond the rim, where they could be systematically broken using iron bars, hammers, or other crushing implements. The process would begin with the smaller bones in the hands and feet, creating intense pain while demonstrating to the victim exactly what awaited the rest of their body. The torture would progress methodically up the arms and legs, with each bone being broken in sequence, while the victim watched their own systematic destruction. The most skilled operators could break every major bone in the victim's body without damaging vital organs or major blood vessels, ensuring that they would remain conscious and aware throughout the complete destruction of their skeletal system. The final stage would involve weaving the victim's broken limbs through the spokes of the wheel, creating a grotesque display that would be erected in public spaces where the victim would hang, still alive, until exposure and infection finally ended their suffering. The fifth and most terrifying device was the Iron Maiden, though not the sensationalized version popularized in modern media, but the real medieval version, which was designed as a gradual compression and penetration device that could inflict thousands of small wounds while preventing any single injury from causing fatal damage. The victim would be placed inside a human-shaped iron cabinet lined with carefully positioned spikes that were too short to penetrate vital organs, but long enough to pierce the skin and muscle tissue throughout the victim's body. The cabinet would then be slowly closed over a period of hours or days, with the spikes gradually penetrating deeper into the victim's flesh, while pressure plates ensured that the wounds remained open and bleeding. The psychological torture was as devastating as the physical pain, as victims were forced to experience their own systematic perforation while remaining trapped in complete darkness, unable to see what was happening to their bodies, but able to feel every spike as it slowly penetrated their flesh. What made these 5 devices more terrifying than death was their sophisticated understanding of human anatomy, psychology, and the precise limits of what the human body could endure while remaining alive and conscious. Medieval torture masters had spent centuries perfecting their knowledge of pain tolerance, vital organ protection, and psychological manipulation to create devices that could inflict maximum suffering while preventing the merciful escape of unconsciousness or death. They understood exactly which bones could be broken without causing fatal internal bleeding, which joints could be dislocated without damaging vital circulation, and which psychological techniques would prevent victims from retreating into madness or dissociation that might provide relief from their physical torment. The medical knowledge that informed the design of these ultimate torture devices reveals how healing professions had been completely perverted to serve the goal of prolonging suffering rather than relieving it, with physicians and anatomists contributing their expertise to ensure that torture victims would remain alive and aware throughout extended periods of systematic destruction. Doctors would monitor victims during torture sessions to prevent accidental death from shock, blood loss, or organ failure, while their anatomical knowledge was used to identify the most painful nerve clusters and pressure points that could be targeted for maximum effect. Medical intervention during torture sessions included techniques for reviving unconscious victims, treating wounds to prevent fatal infections, and maintaining the victim's overall health to ensure that the torture process could continue for weeks or months without interruption. The psychological techniques employed alongside these physical torture devices demonstrate sophisticated understanding of human mental processes and the relationship between physical pain and psychological breakdown that was used to enhance the torture's effectiveness while preventing mental escape mechanisms that might provide relief. Victims would be subjected to carefully timed periods of relief and intensification designed to break down their psychological defenses while maintaining their hope that cooperation might end their suffering. The most skilled torturers would engage in detailed conversations with their victims during the torture process, describing exactly what was happening to their bodies while explaining how much worse their suffering could become if they continued to resist. This psychological manipulation was often more effective than the physical torture itself in extracting confessions and information from victims who would agree to anything to escape the promise of continued or intensified suffering. The public spectacle aspects of these ultimate torture devices transformed them into powerful tools of social control that could influence entire populations through the demonstration of consequences so severe that they transcended normal concepts of punishment or deterrence. Public torture sessions using these devices were carefully orchestrated theatrical events that could draw crowds of thousands while serving multiple propaganda functions for the authorities who organized them. The extended duration of the torture process made these events ideal for public viewing, as spectators could observe the gradual deterioration of victims over hours, days, or weeks, while being educated about the consequences of challenging established authority. The psychological impact on witnesses was as important as the physical suffering of the victims, with the goal being to create such traumatic memories that the very thought of resistance would become associated with unimaginable horror. The economic infrastructure required to support these ultimate torture devices reveals how entire industries had developed around the systematic infliction of human suffering, with specialized craftsmen, medical personnel, and administrative staff being employed to design, build, operate, and maintain torture equipment that represented significant technological and financial investments. Master craftsmen would spend months or years constructing individual devices, incorporating advanced metalworking, mechanical engineering, and precision manufacturing techniques that were often centuries ahead of their time. The most sophisticated torture facilities employed full-time medical staff, professional torturers, security personnel, and administrative officials whose combined salaries represented substantial ongoing expenses that demonstrated the high priority placed on maintaining effective torture capabilities. The international trade in torture technology and expertise created networks of knowledge sharing that spread the most effective torture techniques across cultural and national boundaries, with innovations being communicated through diplomatic channels, military conquest, and commercial exchange. Master torturers would travel between different courts and institutions, sharing their expertise while learning new techniques that could be incorporated into their own practices. Technical manuals describing torture device construction and operation were traded like any other form of valuable intellectual property, while diplomatic correspondence often included detailed discussions of torture innovations and their effectiveness in extracting information or maintaining social control. The documentation and record-keeping associated with these ultimate torture devices created vast archives that provide disturbing insights into the systematic application of extreme cruelty, while serving as institutional memory that could be used to refine and improve future torture operations. Every aspect of each torture session was documented in detail, including the victim's physical and psychological responses, the effectiveness of different techniques, and the optimal timing and intensity for various procedures. This information was analyzed to identify patterns and develop best practices that could be applied to future victims, while the records also served as legal documentation that could be used to justify the torture and demonstrate the professional competence of the operators. The eventual decline of these ultimate torture devices came not through humanitarian reform, but through practical recognition that their extreme nature was becoming politically and economically counterproductive as societies developed more sophisticated methods of social control and information extraction. The enormous resources required to construct, maintain, and operate these devices became increasingly difficult to justify as governments developed more efficient law enforcement and intelligence-gathering capabilities. The international diplomatic consequences of maintaining such extreme torture capabilities also began to outweigh their deterrent benefits, while changing military technologies reduced the importance of extracting tactical information through torture. Perhaps most disturbing of all is how these 5 ultimate torture devices reveal the extraordinary human capacity for applying intelligence, creativity, and technological sophistication to the problem of causing maximum suffering while preventing death, demonstrating that some of the most horrific innovations in human history have emerged not from chaos or ignorance, but from systematic institutional planning that treats human suffering as an engineering problem to be solved through careful study and technological advancement. The fact that entire professional communities could develop around perfecting these devices while maintaining their sense of moral legitimacy and technical competence shows how completely institutional authority and ideological justification can override basic human empathy and moral reasoning when societies prioritize abstract goals over individual human welfare and dignity. What do you think about this absolutely terrifying demonstration of how human intelligence and technological capability can be systematically applied to creating suffering that transcends death itself? Can you imagine the mindset of people who would dedicate their professional lives to engineering devices specifically designed to make death seem like a merciful escape from prolonged torture? The fact that these devices represented cutting-edge technology and professional expertise rather than primitive brutality really makes you wonder about the relationship between technical advancement and moral development, doesn't it? Share your thoughts in the comments about what this reveals about the human capacity for systematic cruelty when it's given institutional support and professional legitimacy. If you found this investigation into medieval torture's most sophisticated and terrifying innovations as disturbing and thought-provoking as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking revelations about how human knowledge and capability can be corrupted to serve the darkest aspects of institutional power. Ring that notification bell because our next deep dive will explore another historical example of how professional expertise can be turned toward perfecting human suffering when societies abandon moral constraints in favor of technical efficiency. Trust me, these stories will change how you think about the relationship between innovation and human rights forever.